Southern Poverty Law Center was funding, creating the hate. It was not fighting, right? So, let me come down a little bit. And he writes in here, Dr. Morris, who was also on the board at the time that I was on the board. Morris was on the board, Dr. Morris, but here it goes. As I noted, Dr. Morris was the economist for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Now, the economist for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation was on the board at the same time I was on the board. Nobody mentions that when they talk about PFA is this racist, awful organization at that time. Nobody mentions that the economist for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation was on the board. He says, Dr. Morris graduated with his PhD in economics in 1957, during an era where black men did not go to university by clear merit and incredible suffering. In spite of this, Dr. Morris is one of the kindest men I could meet. Dr. Morris, with former Colorado Governor Richard Lamb, founded the Progressives for Immigration Reform. So this organization is founded by Colorado Governor and Mr. Morris, who comes from the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Nobody talks about that when they're smearing me as part of being a part of this organization. When I was on the board, never got paid. Being on the board is free. When you go to the board meetings, they will fly you out and they will pay for your food and your hotel. You do not get paid. People don't know how boards work either. That's another reason why it's so stupid. But you got paid. No, I didn't. So let me go to this next one. This group sought to protect the environment and America's black community via immigration reform and attempting economic development and political reform in nations that immigrants are fleeing from. Because this position was opposed by the corporate arm of the Democratic Party, Progressives for Immigration Reform was labeled hate adjacent, a hate adjacent group, and was in effect blacklisted. The SPLC came after the most articulate spokesman in the nation for black economic empowerment. They had his group banned against donations. They chased away board members. They enlisted the press to defame this group and its members. Yes, they did. They absolutely did. They did that. They did it to me. They chased me all around the internet, all around the world. And people are still saying this stuff that is not true in terms of this group and its founding. Years after, like I said, I didn't know he was writing this. I saw it and I said, let me read. I said, oh, he mentioned me. And so I said, years after I was invited to join the board of PFA, years after this, I was invited to join the board of PFA. At the time, the entire board was African-American, except Ben Zuckerman. At the time, the entire board was African-American. Nobody talks about that. When I went to meet to the meet and greet meeting, I was delighted to find Dr. Morris, who I had long admired, was the chairman, and the great Yvette Carnell, whose work in framing Black American culture as specifically American and Black Americans as being unique and having different experiences in the American economy and society from Black immigrants. I was delighted, and I knew I was unworthy in comparison. So he's saying, listen, I was in the orbit of this whole thing. I know the history, but I joined the board because I saw Yvette Carnell there. That's why I came. And I have been asked to come back to this board and many boards for years now. The thing about boards is they have funding. I've seen, even with all of the stuff that came against PFA, I've seen their funding. They have way more funding than ADOS. So my plan in being a part of this board was to get the funding to be used in terms of studies that I could deploy in terms of my politics. And my own people came to me and said, hey, this board that was all African-American except one person at one time, they said, you're a racist for being a part of it. And nobody did any research.